Welcome to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Holly Thacker, and I am so glad to be back in the Sunflower House. And do we have a treat for you? I am so happy to welcome to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast, Leigh Klekar. And she is the woman behind the scenes of everything Speaking of Women's Health. She is our freelance online community manager, and she's been working with our Sunflower team on the Speaking of Women's Health program for over 12 years. Welcome, Leigh.
Hi, thank you.
I know you said you love being behind the scenes and you don't like being on the camera, but you are such a pretty lady and you're so smart and talented, and you've really dedicated so much to helping women be empowered to be strong and be healthy and be in charge, which is our motto at Speaking of Women's Health. So I think it's really great for our audience to find out a little bit more about you and some of the things you're going to be doing in the future. So please tell us about your professional and personal background.
Okay, sure. Well, I started in fundraising at a local children's hospital here in Cleveland and made my way into the marketing world, staying in nonprofit. I've done a little bit of work at a marketing agency, again, here in the Northeast Ohio area. So that's where I sort of got more of my online marketing background and my interest in email and managing, websites, writing online content. And I started working for you, Dr. Thacker, what we said almost 12 years ago. I remember my boys, I only had 2 of my children, and they were so small, and I was looking for something just a little bit more flexible, and this position allowed me to work from home. So I worked from home remotely with, I think they were 3 and 1 years old at the time. But it was great. It allowed me to continue to work and do the what I loved, but then also spend time with my kids because I wasn't really getting that good work-life balance prior to that. So, and as I mentioned, I have 3 kids now. My boys are 15 and 13, so yikes, they're teenagers, and oh my goodness. I mean, I just hope it gets easier because right now it's really rough. And my daughter is 10, so she's my youngest.
So you got that girl on the 3rd try. I got 3 sons, but then I finally got a couple granddaughters.
Yeah.
It's a lot when they're so active and your kids are involved in sports and you're married and you're involved in the community. So it's a lot. It's a full plate. Just like a lot of our listeners have so many things that they're dealing with. So tell us about your role at Speaking of Women's Health.
Yeah. So, well, when I first started at Speaking of Women's Health, we were still doing events. And I really just came on board to help with the content, mostly getting the blog up and running, which we now call a column. And now it's evolved so much. I mean, we're mostly digital, all online. We do some virtual events now, which are great. If anyone hasn't watched those, they're all on our website. I highly recommend going back and watching a lot of them. And we started the podcast in January, so that's been a fun new project. We still are on all the social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, which is now being called X. We'll see how that goes. We are on Rumble and YouTube with our videos. And we also are now active on Thread, so that's a new one. It's an Instagram app for those not familiar with that yet. So we hope everyone, if you're not already, will follow us, follow our content, like and share it. It's a good way to get just snippets of important women's health information. We share topics, everything from pregnancy to menopause to postmenopause, osteoporosis. I mean, Dr. Thacker talks about all these topics, on our podcast every week. But there's so much information. I know, like, even when I talk with my friends, my girlfriends, who most of us are now in perimenopause, they just didn't even know that word existed. So there's a lot of information that I feel like so many women don't know. And so we hope that you'll, go on the website, speakingofwomenshealth.com, follow us on social media, and subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. So,
Yes, people can go on speakingofwomenshealth.com and hit subscribe, because even though a lot of people are moving away from email, people text, they voice text,
Right.
there's all different ways of getting content these days. It's nice that at least once a month we can send out important columns and recipes and free treatment guidebooks. But also sometimes there are breaking health news events, or we are going to do a program. And so I started with Speaking of Women's Health back in 2002 when I opened the Women's Health Center. And at the time, Speaking was being run by our founder and our current chief creative strategist, Diane Dunkelman. And you and I are going to have fun on a future podcast with her in another couple months. So people are going to want to tune into that, because this woman is a powerhouse, not in the medical field at all. And so she'll tell us about how she founded Speaking. And so they were looking to have a big event in Cleveland, and I hadn't yet opened up the Center for Specialized Women's Health, and they were going to all of our other big hospitals in the region, competitors. And so I brought the architectural plans for the center saying, no, we're going to be the place for midlife women's health. And we've certainly evolved to that. There's going to be some other big announcements towards the end of this year that all of our listeners want to stay tuned to into next year. And so we did these big in-person, like Broadway events, and thousands of women got together, and they would hear exciting speakers, some Cleveland Clinic doctors, some non-physicians, some people from around the country. We did free health screenings, and then everybody loved the goodie bags, especially all the little makeup supplies.
Yes, I saw one of the nice bags that we gave away. It was one of the last events. I want to say early 2013 was, I think, the last big event, at least in the Cleveland area.
Yes. I mean, it was really quite a production to raise that money and do those events. And we just found that we were kind of attracting a lot of the same women, which was like fun for that group of women. But it was very, very time consuming. And I thought we really need to reach more people. And the way to do that is digital, where people can get the information, the content, the cutting health information, the empowerment on their own terms. And so we did that long before the pandemic. So we were very well situated for the pandemic. And during the pandemic, you actually contributed some content, being the mom of young children, and having them prepare to go back to school, which our kids, have just all done again. So you've actually provided content for us as a working mom, non-medical person, as well as you're going to do some guest podcasting for us too, aren't you? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we have so much great content on the website, and what we're realizing is we just need to keep getting it out because everyone's asking for it. So I'm going to, be reading a lot of our past columns from some great bloggers that we've had. We have a wonderful partnership with the wellness department at Cleveland Clinic, and they really have wonderful tips, things that, women and men and their family members can do at home, do at work, everything from, if you're having back pain just from sitting in a desk chair all day. Again, as I'm sitting there, I realize I'm so totally slouching. But, tips to sit up properly, to keep that good posture, even if you're going through anxiety and a lot of stress, which, again, it's so many women do. Wonderful tips, just simple things just to get it started. Of course, if anything, becomes larger, you should always talk to your physician, but just wonderful wellness tips. So I'm excited to be able to read those, again, behind the scenes as I like to be, and share that content. And also we'll be having some wonderful podcasts coming up, as we talked about, one of them be with Diane Dunkelman, and I know you're going to be interviewing some other great guests here soon. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting things going on the site. You mentioned a few of my previous columns. I think I wrote a few during COVID, but one of them was just like managing that, if you are working from home and you've got school-age children who are home, or you're working from home and maybe you have babies, or even, kids who are going to preschool, and you're having to it's a lot. It's a big challenge. I look back, I'm like, gosh, how did we do all this?
Yes.
But I mean, you just do it. You go throughout your day and you know, just get done what you need to get done. You know, I always found it also difficult to squeeze in like my exercise. And that's, I know a lot of thing that I talk about with women is finding that time for ourselves to exercise or even to, you know, read a book, take a breather, you know, meditate, whatever you need to do. I kind of, if I'm picking my kids up or when they were little, if they were at the bus stop, I'd be that crazy lady just walking up and down my street waiting for the kids at the bus stop. But I would try to get in my steps any way I could. You know, I'll do lunges while I'm maybe doing some work at the computer, listening to it. Anything I can't, you know, sit-ups. You know, now that my kids are older, I'm in the car a lot, driving them back and forth to their activities. So I'll try and maybe do a pickup a little earlier, maybe a half hour before they're done. And I'll just, you know, find a neighborhood and or walk in the parking lot or something just to kind of keep active. Because that's one thing I'm noticing I just don't have enough time to do. And I'm sure we can all relate to that.
Yes.
So yeah, but that balance of that mom and, I mean, goodness, you know, doctors, I mean, their type of schedules. And, you know, I'm lucky to have worked from home and because it, you know, it's hard. It's hard to do it all.
It is. And I think sometimes, though, when you're working from home, because I do some work from home on a day that I don't see patients where I get a lot of my academic work, my lectures, manuscripts, running our Specialized Women's Health Fellowship, of which we've had some of our graduated fellows, and we'll have some more in the future as well. And so because I'm at home, I have so many friends and family who think, oh, you're not working.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of hard for people who do work really hard. And when you don't even have that separation in terms of geography, everything can just run together. And it just annoys me. And I always correct people, but they still keep saying it. Oh,
right.
Boy.
Oh, I'll get the, oh, you work from home, wink, wink. I'm like, no, there's no wink, wink. I am working.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. And then there's always things calling you, and you can't. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
my mom, she thinks I'm available all the time now. Just calls me in the middle of the day all the time, and yeah.
I bet. Yeah. So I think setting limits and being strong and just empowering yourself. And there's so much on the website that's not classic medical stuff. You know, some of it is. There's men's health and children's health. In fact, my brother. He'll ask me something like, oh, I just covered that on my podcast. Here's my podcast. He's like, well, I can't send it to my men friends because it says speaking of women's health.
Yeah.
So I don't think we want to rebrand, but a lot of the health topics, you know, do span all ages, both sexes. But there are special things about children's health and men's health and things that aren't strictly medical, like caregiving and relationships and aging and just health promotions that are so important. So many people gained weight during the pandemic. Weight is everybody's top of concern. And other things like smoking cessation. And we have some good health calculators. Do you want to talk about some of that that's on the website?
Yeah. And actually, to talk about the smoking articles, my dad has been a longtime smoker, and I have been trying to get him to read our articles and use the resources, you know, that the hospitals have, and he is now 6 months not smoking. Wow. I know, I'm so happy. So I just wanted to comment.
So great.
It's huge. So we're very happy. But I mean, you can do it, and everyone can do that. And there are so many resources, not just on our site, but, you know, at your hospitals, your doctors, your physicians. But yes, we have one thing that, we haven't touched base on our calculators. So I know one of the most popular calculators is the calcium. So are you getting enough calcium in your diet? Yes, that one is just, I mean, I think because women at our age, I know I've had to kind of cut back on my milk drinking because it upsets my stomach. So now I'm like, okay, I'm not getting that calcium from milk anymore. So I know I use it myself, like, okay, here's the foods I need to be, you know, ingesting more, or maybe I do need to take that calcium or the supplement. But that's a great one. The BMI, which, I mean, we're all familiar with BMI when we go to our, you know, our well checks every year. We also have an ideal weight calculator. So that's to determine like your healthiest weight. and just to make sure that you are, you're at a good, healthy weight. And if you're not, if you need to maybe gain a few pounds, there's tips right within that calculator page. And then there's tips to also help you lose weight. We have the pregnancy weight gain calculator for those women who are in that fun. I miss that stage of life. That, oh, so sweet.
Yes.
I just saw one of my friends. It was actually her nephew, and he's just like a 1-year-old, and she's holding him. I'm like, oh, I just can't get enough of that, those babies anymore.
Well, someday you'll have grandchildren.
Yes, I know. Oh gosh, I can't believe I'm to that stage. Wishing for that. Target heart rate. So I know, actually, this is something I use a lot, and it's also on a lot of the Apple Watches or Fitbits or whatever. If you use a pedometer, but making sure that you're actually, a walk is great, but we may not be burning as many calories if we were to get our heart rate up just a little bit more by adding in some strength training, jogging, swimming. I used to do yoga regularly. I don't as much anymore, and I miss it so much. But oh my gosh, that hot yoga, my heart rate would be so high. And then the waist to hip ratio calculator is a great one too, because again, as we hit our midlife, we notice the middle just starts to, it's hard to keep it as tight as it used to be. So it's a nice way to determine where those measurements should be, and a good goal if you need that to happen. So those are a few of the popular ones, and we include those in the newsletters and on social media. So watch out for those links, and we can direct you right to that.
And we've got a lot of healthy recipes and columns, and talk a little bit about how we started about the podcast. I know that I was wanting to do it. My middle son told me for years, before anybody was really podcasting, get your content out, Mom. Everybody's listening to podcasts. And then we finally got that grant for medical education to podcast to busy physicians and nurse practitioners and allied health. And so then we had to do it. We had to do it.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we are the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
I'm laughing because I'm just remembering us trying to work on it. It was over the holidays, and there were a few times we were even in our pajamas late at night trying to get the software and everything to work. It is a lot of work. I've been in marketing for a long time, but I had, this is my first podcast I'd help get off the ground and manage. So just trying to find the right software and making sure it's easy for our audience to listen to, and easy for you because you're very busy to record these podcasts. But it was quite an experience.
I know.
It was funny, but
just trying to get the is the microphone plugged in, or which is the input, the output.
Right.
And now it seems like a little bit more of a breeze. And how many podcasts have we published?
We are on 58 are published, and we have a lot in the queue. Good. So we've got some great topics coming up. We just had the Dry Eye podcast that was published, and we've got the Rosacea, which is a wonderful podcast as well. You have the interview with Dr. Peterson, which was wonderful about everything about breast cancer. She is just like you, one of those amazing physicians that just knows everything. So omega-3 one.
I'll have to have her back again because we definitely, disagree on certain points. So we were kind of getting into it at the end. So there's just so much because that is such an important topic for women. In fact, when we got the grant from the Avon Foundation to open the Center for Specialized Women's Health. Avon had always focused on breast health, and that was kind of like the pinnacle or the symbol, but that it's so important to just look at all of the whole woman's health and not just breast. So it's been very exciting to be part of this evolution. And do you want to talk a little bit about the technicalities of podcasts? Because I find that when I see patients in the office and they'll say, oh, I listened to that one podcast. I'm like, oh, that's great. And here we are talking about another problem that they have. I'm like, oh, did you hear that one? They're like, no, I didn't get that one. So I think that some people are just listening to these podcasts on our website or through the e-newsletter, which is certainly fine. But do you want to talk a little bit about the technicality? Some people are very facile with subscribing or following or knowing how to get on podcast apps, but not everybody is.
Right. So I actually don't have an Apple. I don't have an iPhone. So if you're like me and I have a Google Pixel phone, but if you have a Samsung or any other Android phone that's not iPhone, I use Google Podcasts and I use Spotify. Those are two apps that you can download on your phone or your iPad. And if you are, so here I'm going to hold up my phone, that is a terrible picture. However, there is our pretty little purple box here, the Speaking of Women's Health podcast logo. It's our podcast logo. Uh-huh. If you are in, say, Google Podcasts and you just search Speaking of Women's Health podcast, you will see us. You click on that purple logo, and then it'll take you to it's a Speaking of Women's Health podcast page. And then there's just a nice, friendly little button here that you hit subscribe. That means that every podcast that we post, which is typically usually the beginning of the week, will just pop up into your Google Podcast, and you'll get a notification. There is a way in the settings too, you can change it if you don't want notifications. You can also in the settings mark it so it automatically downloads on your phone. So that means if you're going for a walk or you're going in your car somewhere maybe where you aren't on Wi-Fi, then it'll be downloaded on your phone, and you can just pop those earbuds in or connect it to the Bluetooth on your phone and listen to it. Spotify is another great one as well, and they do a nice job again with your settings that you can turn on the notifications, so you'll get that notification every time we have a podcast published, and then also it'll download as well on your phone. Now, if you have an Apple iPhone, I assume that it works the same exact way.
So here's my Apple iPhone, and there's the little purple app. And it's kind of fun because everybody has different phones, and if I have any time at the end of the visit with patients, we have QR codes that they can scan in the office and in their folder that will bring it up so they don't have to type it in. But some people can't even find their podcast app. So I just say, well, just type in under search and just put pod. And then a lot of times that will bring up whatever their podcast app, many of whom don't even know they have it. And it's all free. There's no cost. I mean, people can subscribe and pay if they want to give donations, just like they can go on our website since we are a nonprofit and give a donation. And that's very much appreciated. And we have so many people who've supported our mission over the years, and we're so incredibly grateful. Thank you. But really, anyone who has an internet connection can listen to these. One thing that I was finding yesterday, I was talking to a lady who had some sleep apnea, and I thought, oh, we just did that great interview with a dentist, Dr. Margaret Frankel Richards, who does dental treatments for sleep apnea. And so I thought, oh, she should really listen to this. And then I was in her podcast app, but there's already 58 downloads. So I'm scrolling. And in some podcast app, I don't think you can search. But then I went on our Speaking of Women's Health site, which we usually like to link on people's phones, with a little nice sunflower. And in the search button in the upper right corner, I just put oral health. And then the podcast popped up. So I figured that's probably the best way if someone wants topics to put the information in. And then on our website, if there's a podcast and you want to listen instead of read, you can. If it's not, and it's just, information or links to other things. I know one of the ones that I recommend almost every day is the podcast on how to save money on medicines. And some people don't want to listen. They just want the article and they want all the different links so they can go and check the different prices in different locations. So everybody learns a little bit differently, and it's nice to have these options. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because I still enjoy, we've talked about this. I still enjoy the e-newsletter. I mean, I love email. And I mean, I think because I'm on my on my laptop all day, I like to see things bigger still. I like that email. I like to read the highlights. So that's how I still work. I'm starting to get into the podcast now that we have one. But yeah, I just, so we all like to get our information in different ways. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. And our podcast, you want to talk about how people, if they like to watch on Rumble, I mean, most people just listen to podcasts when they're exercising or walking or driving or cleaning or doing something where they can listen, but can't see. But there are people who visually like to see our guest and watch.
Yeah. So we are putting most of the podcasts on Rumble. So rumble.com, it's rumble.com. And we have about probably it'll be a couple dozen maybe pretty soon here that we'll have up on there. But yeah, it started because you had an interview with a guest and we thought, let's try this, the video feature of the software we're using. And it was great. I mean, especially because you get to see who, sometimes if you just hear a voice, you're like, you have what does that person look like? So it's nice to kind of put a face with a voice. And it's easy. And also Rumble, it's just a lot like YouTube. So you can subscribe to our Rumble page, Speaking of Women's Health, and then you will get automatic notifications anytime we post a new video on there. And we'll start promoting that a lot more. We wanted to make sure that, technically everything was working great, and it seems to be going really well. So we'll probably be posting this one on there.
Yes. So I know we have a channel on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
Do you think we should put them on YouTube or just keep our separate educational videos that we have on YouTube or?
Yeah, it's funny because Rumble allows you to integrate with YouTube, and I've considered doing that integration, but then I also agree with you. It's nice to kind of have the two different channels, YouTube to maybe have when we have more just health tips, and you do a lot of great interviews with the news and the media.
Yes.
And then, and Rumble is our podcast. But then, some people maybe don't want to have another website that they have to go to or another app. And I get that totally. I mean, my phone, I have storage issues all the time. So, if you're already on YouTube, I think maybe we should put a couple of the popular ones and we'll see how they go and see how people respond to that. So I think that's a great idea. And
we're also on LinkedIn.
Yes.
So I think a lot of professionals follow us on LinkedIn. So there's just so much. And I know we have our standard followers on Facebook. And so I've learned how to post on Instagram and Facebook, or I use the Hootsuite to sometimes do Facebook and Twitter. But I don't know if there's one to do all three. I was going to post a picture of some of us working yesterday in the Tuesday clinic. There was a cute picture. So I've got to do that yet. But it seems like a lot of our followers like to see the people in the center or the people behind Speaking of Women's Health. So I really appreciate you so much for taking time out of your such busy schedule, being a working mom of 3 kids and being our online manager and our executive producer of our podcast. You are listening to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast, and our guest and our executive producer, Leigh Klekar, has joined us for this wonderful podcast, and she's our online community manager. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to help support the podcast, please share it with others. You can email it and text it, signal it. And if you're able to, we certainly would appreciate any donation to our nonprofit. Or at the very least, click on the 5-star rating and review. That helps us move up in the podcast. And to catch all the latest from us, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn. Any last parting words, Leigh?
No, I mean, I also want to thank, our audience and everyone for tuning in and supporting the program and supporting the content we put out there. So, and I'm just so grateful, this has been a dream job for me, to be able to have that work-life balance, and I'm very lucky. So thank you, Dr. Thacker.
Well, thank you, and we are so blessed to have you. And thanks to all of our listeners and supporters, and we look forward to seeing you back in the Sunflower House for our next edition.